Hey guys! Today we'll be covering a 2015 romance miniseries called High-End Crush. The series opens up with Choi Soo-hoon, the CEO of G Choi, a leading K-pop entertainment company with a star-studded roster. Many people believe that Choi has the Midas touch, and he himself thinks that he can make a celebrity out of just about anyone. He is wealthy and accomplished, but at the same time, he is also distraught, haughty, and pompous. Choi enters a media company with his assistant Hyo and disrupts a meeting despite security guards trying their best to stop him. The CEO of the media company, Young, yells at him for disturbing their meeting, but Choi tells them that he is the one who holds 70% of the company's shares and has the right to attend any meeting he desires. After this, Young, who was discussing an actor with his director, listens to Choi's proposal of changing their lead actor for the upcoming project. At first, the director refuses to do so, but when Choi shows him an attractive picture of another actor, he reluctantly agrees. Later, Choi can be seen arguing with his doctor about his blood pressure when he receives a call from Hyo. However, he does not accept the call and walks out of the hospital. On the other hand, Hyo can be seen chasing a female actress, Min-ju, who ran away from their shooting. After a short chase, Hyo and his men manage to surround Min-ju, but she screams for help. Hearing Min-ju scream, a young and beautiful girl, Yoo Ryong, arrives and hits Hyo with a stick. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Min-ju runs away. Following the incident, Hyo again calls Choi and tells him about the situation. However, Choi disregards him and cuts the call short. Enraged, Hyo turns towards Ryong and asks her to help him. He pretends he is badly hurt and manipulates Ryong to take the place of Min-ju. Realizing that she ruined the situation, Ryong agrees to help. Meanwhile, Choi finds Min-ju inside a restaurant and brings her back to the office. There, he notices Ryong preparing for the shoot. Seeing her beauty, Choi is amazed and keeps on staring at her. Later, when he is overseeing Min-ju's photo shoot, one of his employees approaches him and asks him to visit the new actress. Elsewhere, Ryong is inside the changing room, waiting for the employees to provide her with her dress to wear. She is throwing items outside and behaving violently. Hyo refuses to confront her, so Choi enters the room and grabs her hand. Unfortunately, he catches Ryong naked, prompting her to land a solid punch on him. In the next scene, Choi is at home taking care of his swollen eye with an ice pack. Hyo arrives with Ryong, who is still asking them to return her dress. Right then, Choi looks at Ryong and realizes that she has qualities to become a worldwide superstar. With an aim to help, he approaches Ryong and asks her to join his company. However, she refuses his offer and continues asking for her dress. Frustrated by her behavior, Choi grabs her hand and pulls her toward him. This makes Ryong uncomfortable, prompting her to push Choi away. Unfortunately, the push is so hard that he lands on the floor and gets knocked out. Seeing this, Hyo suggests Ryong run away or else she will be in big trouble, and the latter obliges. Sometime later, Choi regains his consciousness and asks his assistant about Ryong. When Hyo tells him that she ran away, Choi immediately rushes outside to search for her and finds her waiting for a bus. The scene then shifts to a meeting room where Ryong is with CEO Young and his lawyer, filing a case against Choi for assaulting and abusing her. Choi is shocked to hear this, and he immediately turns towards Hyo for an explanation. Hyo replies that he simply gave his mobile to Ryong, oblivious that she would call CEO Young for help. Back at Choi's home, Hyo does a bit of research and finds out the connection between CEO Young and Ryong. He tells Choi that when Young went hiking one night, he lost his way and was saved by Ryong. Because of this, he offered her money as a kind gesture, but Ryong refused it, claiming she doesn't want to become rich with others' money. Hearing this, Choi becomes curious and asks his assistant to collect more information about Ryong. Surprisingly, Hyo takes it seriously and gathers a team to prepare a documentary about Ryong. After learning that Ryong lives in a village all alone, Choi decides to meet her in person. Following a map, he stops at a shop and asks the owner if he knows anything about Ryong. The shop owner tells him that Ryong lives in the mountains and is more beautiful than her mother. He also tells Choi that he cannot drive his car up the hill and has to walk to the place. However, despite the shop owner's suggestions, Choi drives his car up the narrow road and gets stuck. He then walks up the hill but fails to find Ryong's house. After resting for some time, Choi notices a house deep in the forest. After a bit of a struggle, he finally reaches it and calls Ryong. But to his misfortune, no one opens the gate and he is forced to stay outside. Meanwhile, Ho tries to call Choi, but due to the poor service, it doesn't connect. However, instead of feeling worried about his boss, Hyo appears to be happy that there is no one to torture him for the day. Time passes and night falls. Choi is still waiting outside Ryong's gate, hoping that she will arrive soon. Just then, he hears some sounds coming from the nearby pond. Choi carefully walks up to the pond and notices Ryong floating on the water. He assumes that she is dead and jumps into the pond to save her. However, it appears that Ryong is just swimming and she screams after seeing Choi. Terrified, Choi goes deep into the water and faints. As a result, Ryung immediately springs into action and rescues him. At home, Ryung changes Choi's clothes and dries him. Shortly after, he comes back to his senses and is startled to find himself naked. Ryung tells him to rest, but Choi keeps on asking for some clothes to wear. She reluctantly provides him with some of her grandfather's clothes and goes to her room. However, Choi cannot sleep because he keeps hearing strange sounds from outside. When the paranoia and fear get the best of him, he screams and calls for help. As soon as Ryung arrives, Choi holds her hand and asks her to stay with him for the night. He also makes it clear that they are no match for each other. However, Ryung, who does not like Choi, refuses to stay with him. The next morning, Choi can be seen sleeping with his hand tied with a rope to Ryung's so that he wouldn't get afraid while sleeping alone. When he wakes up, Ryung visits his room and asks him to get ready for breakfast. Following this, Choi freshens up and goes to the kitchen. Ryung has prepared 5 different dishes for him and serves him at the table. Choi asks why she prepared only 5 dishes for him and served 9 dishes when CEO Young visited her earlier. The question surprises Ryung and she wonders how he knows about it. Choi responds that he can find information about anything he wants. Elsewhere, Hyo has started getting worried about his boss. He is well aware of Choi's preferences and asks his employees to search all the 5-star hotels in the area. After having breakfast, Choi asks Ryung to come to Seoul with him and sign the contract. However, Ryung refuses to comply, claiming that she is not interested in any of it. She then continues doing her household chores. In an attempt to persuade Ryung, Choi helps her to complete her chores and continues asking her to accept the contract. When Ryung refuses again, Choi gets angry and starts walking back down the hill. However, he is so desperate to sign a contract with Ryung that he throws his pride aside and returns to her house. Unfortunately, when he reaches outside the house, he notices Ryung talking to another man. In the next scene, Hyo can be seen talking to somebody about the possibility of Choi being kidnapped or trapped in an accident. Suddenly, Choi arrives in the cabin, and Hyo is surprised to see him. He asks Choi why he didn't pick up his call, and the latter replies that it's his choice to decide which call to pick up. Shortly after, when Choi checks his computer, he finds out that Hyo was actually searching for another job, believing that he is dead. The scene then flashes back to where Choi notices a man with Ryung. Choi approaches her and finds out that the man is actually Ryung's neighbor and friend, Hong Ho. Relieved, he hands Ryung his business card and asks her to call him if she needs anything. While returning, Choi pulls Hong Ho out of Ryung's house and threatens him to stay away from her. He then walks back, only after Hong Ho returns home. Back in the present, Choi is at a meeting where he is continuously checking his phone to see if Ryung has called him. He becomes disappointed after finding that there are no missed calls. This scene continues for a couple of days, and Choi seems very much affected by Ryung not calling him back. In the next scene, Choi meets with Hyo and mentions that Ryung may not have a mobile phone. That's why she hasn't called him yet. Just then, one of Choi's employees arrives and turns on the TV, where the news shows coverage of the heavy rains in the mountain regions. As soon as Choi sees this, he becomes concerned about Ryung, as she lives in the mountains all alone. He then decides to visit her and bring her back to Seoul. The scene then shifts to Ryung's residence, where it is raining heavily. As a terrified Ryung sits with her dog, Choi arrives outside. Seeing him, Ryung runs towards him and hugs him tightly. Following this, Choi brings Ryung back to Seoul and again asks her to sign the contract. He also promises not to tell anyone about her hugging him. After reaching their office, Choi asks Hyo to take care of Ryung's dog and to arrange a meeting. In the meeting, Choi introduces Ryung to his staff and asks them to capture her inner beauty in a photo shoot. As the two continue chatting, Choi slowly starts falling in love with her. After the photo shoot is over, Choi takes Ryung to a new apartment that he has bought for her. He tells her that she will receive a new mobile phone by tomorrow and asks her to spend the night well. He also reminds her that she needs to pay him back by cooperating with him and working hard for the music video. Meanwhile, Hyo is talking to his friends from the office about how Choi's behavior has changed since he met Ryung. The next day, Choi visits Ryung early in the morning and asks her to prepare a meal for him. After having the meal, Choi returns to his office. Elsewhere, CEO Young finds out that Ryung is working for Choi and is in Seoul for the music video. In the following scene, Hyo and his friends approach Choi and tell him that his behavior has changed recently. He also tells him that he seems worried about Ryung all the time. Hearing this, Choi's pride is hurt, and he decides to stay away from Ryung. He then sends Hyo to pick up Ryong and bring her to the office. Later, while escorting her, Hyo tells Ryong that she is a perfect match for Choi. In the evening, Hyo visits Choi and informs him that the other girls from the office are taking Ryong to a club. Realizing that Ryong lives in the mountains and has no idea about club culture, Cho gets mad and goes to the club. Outside, he notices Ryong with a girl, feeling uncomfortable in her shorts. He tries to stop her, but Hyo prevents him from doing so. At night, Ryong finds a mobile phone inside her apartment and soon receives a call from Choi. He asks her about what she did the whole day, and later video calls her on the tablet placed beside her bed. When Ryong picks up the call and begins answering his questions, someone knocks on the door. On the call, Choi hears something being dropped on the floor and tries to call her back. Despite trying numerous times, Ryong doesn't pick up the call, leaving Choi worried. Wasting no time, Choi arrives at Ryong's apartment and finds her safe and sound. He inquires about who knocked on the door, and Ryong replies that there was no one. Hearing this, Choi becomes angry and lashes out at her for opening the door to strangers. Before leaving, he also asks her to be careful and think twice about opening the door. When Choi leaves, we can see Hong Ho sitting outside Ryong's apartment building. He calls CEO Young and tells him that he has delivered the message to Ryong. The next day when Choi arrives at the office, he notices a big picture of Ryong hanging on the wall. He immediately calls Hyo and asks him why he did this. Hyo replies that he knows Choi likes Ryong and also says that he is bringing her to the office. Hearing this, Choi becomes enraged and waits for Hyo to arrive at the office. Later that day, Ryong goes to meet CEO Young, where Hong Ho is also present. Young discusses Choi and belittles his company. Suddenly, Choi also arrives there and confronts Young. He is there because while checking the CCTV footage, he found out that Hong Ho visited Ryong the night before. Click the link below for part 2.